Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 40 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Anaheim Ducks, in which the Sharks have lost 5-4 in overtime. This is the fourth matchup between these two teams this season. In each of the first two matchups, the Sharks also lost to the Ducks in post-regulation play, but in their third matchup between these two teams, the Sharks really took it to the Ducks and won by a score of 6-1. And this game seemed to be starting off similar to that maybe the Sharks had really figured out the Ducks and the Ducks just couldn't really handle things, as the Sharks scored not even a minute in from Matt Nieto, and then a few minutes later would get another from Steven Lorentz to make it 2-0. And generally the first period was looking very, very strong from a Sharks perspective, so strong in fact that even though the Ducks did end up tying this game in the first with goals from Zegras and Strome, a 2-2 game after 20 minutes, there was still a lot of confidence that the Sharks would be able to close this one out because, again, like I said, the first period was rather productive for them. But the major problem was that it kind of just ended there. While all four lines were really rolling in that first period, the next two periods really only kept that first line rolling, and the other three sort of began to lag behind. Now, in the second period, the Sharks would manage to get their lead back. A goal from Meyer would be equalized by McTavish, but a second goal from Meyer would be where we stand at the end of 40 minutes. Interestingly enough, with these Meyer goals, both of them looked to be LeBanc goals, as they were both off of his shots, but upon further review, they ended up both being changed to Meyer goals because of him being able to tip them in, and as such he gets his 22nd and 23rd goals of the season. Also, interestingly enough, these goals came about 3 minutes apart, and then very, very soon after that second goal, Meyer came within inches of scoring a third one, which would have been one of the quickest hat tricks that we will have seen in San Jose Sharks history, I imagine, which as it would have only come within like 3.5 minutes max, but not to be, and that is definitely not the story of this game. The story of this game actually occurs in the third period. So as I said, the Sharks, they're up 4-3. They're playing a solid third period. They're not necessarily pushing the pace, but they're not getting pushed in either. Generally, they're doing a decent job of protecting this one-goal lead. Yes, they would have liked to really control the pace like they did in the first period, but it's not the end of the world, especially here on the road. But that brings us here to this second McTavish goal. It gets scored, the game gets tied up, but the San Jose Sharks have something to say about it. David Quinn challenges for the offside, and upon further review, it looks like this is going to be the easiest offside call in the history of the NHL. Adam Henrique is clearly 1 mile offside. He is fully in the zone. There's no shenanigans of whether or not his skate is potentially touching the blue line or anything of that nature. It is quite clear that by the time the puck moves past the blue line, Henrique is entirely in the Sharks zone. And so it looked like within 5 seconds the linesman would come out, say, whoops, my bad, I missed this. This is clearly offside. Still a 4-3 game for San Jose. And the commentators here at ESPN Plus were also convinced that this was going to be the call. They were both very much watching the review and saying this is probably offside. In fact, they even had a rules expert there on site to tell them that it did seem to be offside. And yet, as this review wore on, it became more and more clear that this one was probably going to end up standing. With the reasoning, I was not sure of, but when you're 2 minutes into what should have been the easiest call ever, you're thinking that there's got to be some sort of ruling that you just are unaware of, that I was just unaware of, for why this might end up being onside, and apparently that is indeed the case. So what this, I believe, ends up coming down to is that while Henrique was indeed fully in the zone when the puck crosses the blue line, technically Fowler doesn't have possession of the puck, and by the time Fowler actually possesses the puck in the Sharks zone, Henrique has indeed tagged up. So this is something that we had seen in the playoffs, I believe, last season with Cale Makar, called the Cale Makar offside rule, with a very similar type of situation where a goal did stand even though it looked like it should have been offside, and it seems that so that rule has reared its ugly head once more here. It is not really logical to me for why this is even the case. I mean, I would say Fowler, while he doesn't technically touch this puck, it's quite clear he has possession of it. It's definitely not just like completely out of reach and the puck just happens to roll into the zone, and luckily Henrique tags up before Fowler reaches it. He clearly is possessing it, even if he's not necessarily actively touching it. So I definitely do not agree with the rule, but I guess by the letter of the law, it is technically the correct call. Luckily for me, I would probably be a lot more angry if I was very fully invested in the Sharks being able to make the playoffs this season. But since this season is a complete wash here halfway through the year, this is more so a comical type of situation, more so than an upsetting type of situation. It's just very strange that this is even something that, like, what clearly looks to be offside could ever in any universe be onside, yet here we are. And then finally we end up going to the overtime because of this. There is not really too many chances prior to the actual goal being scored. McTavish gives this puck away, Hertl gets it, but then Hertl gives the puck away back to McTavish, and then a kind of a nice play goes on between McTavish, Terry, and Klingberg to get the overtime game winner, and the Ducks win it 5-4. The Sharks will get a singular point here tonight, but will lose out on the extra one to a Ducks team that is one of the few below the San Jose Sharks in the standings. So if you are one of those people who were thinking, missed opportunity the other night against the Chicago Blackhawks when the Sharks won that one in regulation, you'll be happy at the very least that the Sharks ended up losing this one, even if it was in overtime. Moving on to the players to talk about, we have the first line of Meier, Hertl, and LeBanc. So a bit of a return to normalcy here, lines that we had really been seeing a lot of prior to, the Hertl suspension and things of that nature. Hertl, Meier, and LeBanc reunited, and they had an absolutely fantastic game here for the San Jose Sharks. Like I mentioned earlier, while all four lines were definitely rolling in that first period, as the game wore on, the other lines kind of fell off, but this line never really did. They were always going. Meier, definitely the big reason for that. He continues to be the best forward for the San Jose Sharks this season, and I think that's honestly by far, it's not particularly close. After having gone the first 9 games of this season without a single goal, he has now gone the last 31 games with 23 of them, which is incredibly impressive to say the least. He is just playing on an absolute another level at this point, similar to how he was last season, potentially even slightly better, though that might just be some sort of recency bias. And the commentators in tonight's game were talking about whether or not he could end up getting moved at the trade deadline, and they mentioned, he could definitely get a first round pick and maybe some prospects. There's definitely no maybe there. If Meier were indeed to be traded, he would get a first, and he would get whatever teams that he would be heading towards their best prospect for sure. Meier is just that good of a player, and he's just been absolutely fantastic, lights out for the San Jose Sharks in almost every single game that they have played thus far this season, outside of that early season slump through the first few games. When it comes to the rest of his line mates, of course, I thought Hertl was still quite solid, and LeBanc obviously getting those couple of primary assists on the 2 Meier tip goals was quite nice to see. On the second line, we had Nieto here back with Couture and Barabanov, a line that we had seen a decent amount of, and early on in this game, I thought they actually looked really good. Barabanov had multiple very strong shifts. Nieto was actually quite complimentary on this line early on as well, but in the second and then the third period, that definitely fell off a cliff. Nieto became more so invisible. There was maybe like a chance or two. I believe Couture had a decent one in the second period, if I'm not mistaken, on like a sort of 3-on-2, 3-on-1 type of situation, but realistically the second line not super amazing past those first 20 minutes. The third line I thought was actually okay in the last 40 minutes of this game, besides the first line, which was just far and away the best line. This was potentially the Sharks' second best line, like I said, not counting the first period. I thought Bonino, Sturm, and Svechnikov generated some okay chances, some okay zone time, nothing amazing. They didn't actually manage to score a goal here or anything of that nature, and that they're actually the only line in this game that didn't manage to contribute on the scoreboard for the San Jose Sharks, but still, they had some decent opportunities, which I will say is kudos to them. When it comes to the fourth line, here's the thing. I thought they were very impressive in the first period. Gadjevich had some very hard work on that shift that led to the Lorenz goal, which also led to an Erik Karlsson assist, which we are indeed thankful for, to continue that sort of history in the making. Is 14 straight games with an assist, which is getting close to the all-time record for defensemen. But the fact is that in the latter 40 minutes, this fourth line did very, very little. There wasn't necessarily much of Lindblom. I thought Lorenz still did okay, but also not too much of Gadjevich. The fact, though, is the bottom line is that I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. this fourth line did manage to get a goal here for the San Jose Sharks, which is much more than they usually do on any particular night. So you got to say that they had a pretty good game in general. When it comes to the first defensive pairing here for the San Jose Sharks, and of course Erik Karlsson, I thought he had a very, very good game. Not insane, not at the level that we have seen at times this season, like against, when he put up like 4 points against the Minnesota Wild, or like 5 points earlier on than that. But I still thought he was very, very good, controlling the pace of the game when he was indeed on the ice. Only managed the singular assist, if I'm not mistaken, which is enough to continue the point streak, but not necessarily what we come to expect from Erik Karlsson thus far this season. But at the very least, it wasn't a hardcore negative game for him, which is definitely very nice. His defense, while not amazing, obviously, was definitely not too bad either, and he generally was a positive impact player for the San Jose Sharks when he was on the ice, even if we weren't necessarily seeing those like perfectly orchestrated passes and plays that we sometimes see from him. When it comes to the other 4 players on the ice here tonight defensively for the Sharks, it was generally a clean defensive game. Like I said earlier on, while I don't think the Sharks were necessarily great in the second and third period, it's not as though that the Ducks dominated them. It was just relatively even, which you don't necessarily want to be with a Ducks team that is not very good, though the Sharks are, of course, not very good either. On the other hand, there were some awkward plays defensively. I thought Ferraro looked kind of bad here tonight at times. Vlasic had that bad giveaway that led to the Zegras goal, which was not something that you wanted to give up in a first period where the Sharks were quite dominant, and at that point were still leading 2-0. So not an amazing game for the Sharks' bottom 4 defensemen, but I guess not terrible and not as bad as we have seen at times this season. And then when it comes to the goaltenders, we had yet another start here for Kähkönen. Now, he got the last one against the Chicago Blackhawks, and I guess because he played well enough against Chicago, the worst team in the league, mind you, he earned himself a second straight start against the Ducks, who are, I believe, the 3rd worst team in the entire league, and, well, he was not that great. Yes, many of these goals weren't necessarily his fault, but for instance, he could have technically had this overtime game winner from Klingberg. He probably could have cut off this angle better on the Trevor Zegras goal. The McTavish one was definitely stoppable. Maybe not too much of a chance on the Strome one, but generally, Kähkönen, he let in 5 goals. Yes, we did see like that one amazing save on the glove save. I believe it was on Klingberg as well. But realistically, he still lets in 5 goals. Many of these are stoppable shots, and it's a game that the Sharks definitely could have won with better goaltending that they just didn't get, which has been a big story for the San Jose Sharks thus far this season. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action tomorrow, where they will take on the Boston Bruins. So the Sharks will have gone from facing the worst teams in the entire league with the Blackhawks and the Ducks to suddenly facing off against the literal best team in the entire league, the Boston Bruins. And, well, it could very well end up as a slaughter, considering this is the second half of a back-to-back, but maybe the Sharks will surprise us. Class dismissed.